Minutes past 8 o'clock. Well, well, well. Our story yesterday about the hazards of smart motorways, so-called smart motorways, has prompted one of the biggest responses I've ever encountered in live television. Extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary.
And as you were saying a little earlier, it is rare to find a response that is, keep them, they're fantastically safe, I really enjoy using a smart motorway.
Not a single solitary one.
They are generally just horror stories about your own frightening experiences on these very contentious stretches of road. Here's some of your stories.
Please see what happened to my wife's car when she had a tyre blow out. A lorry hit her car and pushed it 500 yards up the motorway. I can't believe people were paid wages to make this decision, to get rid of a hard shoulder.
About 10 years ago, I almost got crushed by a lorry who pulled across me to take the next junction. It had no idea I was there. I crashed my car into the barrier. If I did not, I would have died.
We were hit by another car on a smart motorway with our kids in the car. There was nowhere to pull over, and we had to deal with lorries flying past and other drivers shouting abuse. It was really terrifying.
My son hit a car on a smart motorway with an Arctic lorry. The driver was sat in the passenger seat. Luckily, had no injuries.
I've broken down on the M27 smart motorway and I feared for my life. I couldn't get out of the car as the barrier was just too close, and I literally cried until the recovery team arrived. I survived, but many won't.
Well, let's talk about smart motorways with somebody who has had a devastating experience as a result.
Yes,
Her husband, Derek, travelling on one. Sally Jacobs. Derek was killed in a smart motorway accident, wasn't he, 2 years ago? I was listening to you talking about your husband yesterday, and one of the things that struck, well, that got to me was the fact that he was a very safe driver, wasn't he? He would have done everything he could to make sure that he was safe on a motorway. But when he suffered a tyre blowout, he didn't even have time to get out of his vehicle, did he?
But I correct you there.
Yes.
He did have time to get out of his vehicle,
okay.
but he didn't have time to get over the barrier.
Yes.
Before he could get over the barrier, a car hit his van, crushing it onto him. In fact, I believe that they had to cut the barrier away. But of course, what people don't realise, the emergency services cannot get down to them quickly because the lane is blocked. In his case, it was blocked for 9 hours while they brought the emergency services in from the opposite direction.
So, Sally, this is one of the other consequences of not having a hard shoulder, is that, of course, if you then have an accident in the live lane, how do the emergency services get to you?
Well, they don't, do they?
It's absolutely shocking.
So just to be clear, he has a blowout, and of course, if you have a blowout, you can't limp on to a safe, a so-called safe zone. That's it. You stop where the blowouts happened. Can you just give us an idea? And I know this, I think it's incredibly public-spirited of you to come on this programme live, Sally, because it's only happened a couple of years ago, and you're still very raw about this. But can you give us an idea, literally in terms of seconds or minutes, how long was it before the tyre burst and his car was hit by the van and he was killed? What was the gap?
It would have been seconds. That's why the cameras are irrelevant, whether they're working or not, because you have seconds to get to safety with traffic thundering down behind you. So it doesn't matter whether the cameras work or they don't, you know?
Sally, I couldn't agree. I'm so glad you've said that point from your personal experience, because so many people have been trying to get this across to the government, to the Department of Transport, that they can go on all they like about these cameras. We'll get them working, we'll get full coverage, it'll be fine. As you say, you look at what happened to Derek, there could have been 50 cameras on that scene. It would have made not a blind bit of difference.
It wouldn't have mattered at all. I mean, the police said to me that he did nothing wrong. He did it all by the book, and still he was killed. It's just terrible.
Can I ask, how are you now, Sally? How are you managing? It's only been a couple of years, as I've said. How are you doing?
Good days and bad days. Every day I think about him because we never had any tradesmen in. He did everything. And so everywhere I touch, he wasn't very tall, but he was a giant of a man. Loved clothes, loved life, looking forward, loved his family. Just don't want to be here, to be quite honest, without him. We met when we were 16 and 17, and 66 years is a long, long time.
Well, the thing is, Sally, you've been robbed. That's what's happened here. You have been robbed of a good man.
Robbed of the man I loved and his family. Yeah. I mean, the grandchildren are still devastated. They can't bear to the house because he's not here.
Sally, I get nervous when I'm driving on a smart motorway, and I would be very concerned about anybody without experience. I mean, you know, young, newly qualified drivers driving on smart motorways. What did you make of the Transport Select Committee report? It's obviously not the government recommendation, but they're saying to the government, suspend smart motorways until we can properly review the data. Is that far enough, or do you think they should just be scrapped altogether?
No, they're just biding their time. Why suspend? Why not reinstate the hard shoulder straight away? That will not cost a penny, and you can still use the cameras to monitor anybody broken down. Yes. And you've got to be very careful. Smart motorways, they no longer call them smart motorways. So are they saying no more rollout for smart motorways, but we'll roll out digital motorways?
Yes,
yes,
exactly. They're just rebranding it, exactly right. Well, all right, just stay with us, Sally, and let's listen to what Ian Seabrook is going to tell us. Ian is a motoring journalist and a YouTuber who had an absolutely terrifying breakdown. It actually wasn't on a smart motorway, it was on a dual carriageway, but it was a dual carriageway that didn't have a hard shoulder. So the experience of being broken down in a live lane was exactly the same. So you got a taste of what it would have been like if this had happened to you on a bit of so-called smart motorway. Describe your experience and what it did to your head as you were sitting there, Ian.
Well, yeah, it was absolutely terrifying. I was driving a 1950s Jaguar, 70 miles an hour, really enjoying the experience. All of a sudden, all the electrics die, and I can see a lay-by. I'm desperately knocking it into neutral to try and coast to the lay-by. And it didn't make it. I had to get out of the car in a live traffic lane and jump over the barrier. And absolutely terrifying. I think if it had been a motorway, it would have been a lot busier. It could have been a lot worse. But thankfully, there was no incident. But you just feel so helpless when you're effectively trapped in a live running lane.
You know, it's interesting, Ian, because when smart motorways began, you backed them in principle, didn't you?
Yeah. I mean, I used to travel through Birmingham a lot, and I think smart motorways did, when they sort of had the dynamic hard shoulder where you could use that extra lane, it definitely helped keep the traffic flowing. But that was kind of assuming that it was monitored more than it actually is. I'm told there are something like 8 people monitoring over 400 cameras. And you just think, how are they going to spot an incident? It's genuinely...
But as we just heard, you see, I personally think that this argument about the cameras is now completely redundant or odious. Yeah. Because, as we just heard from Sally, her husband got out of the car and was killed in seconds. Yeah. So, as I said, there could have been 100 cameras pointing at that scene and 100 operators prepared to press buttons and call up support and put the big red X over the lane. It made no difference at all. And he won't be... And until these lanes are restored to hard shoulders, it's going to happen again, isn't it? I mean, statistics and probabilities tell us it's going to happen. It could happen this morning.
Yeah. And as time has gone on, my enjoyment of those smart motorway sections where it's all lane running, it's definitely become scary. I don't like travelling in that lane because you just don't know what you're going to see. The section through just north of Birmingham, very, very bendy. So you've got no sight of what's around the bend. There could be a truck stopped and you won't be able to see it until it's too late. So, my enjoyment of those sections has definitely evaporated somewhat.
Exactly right. Can I just ask about figures, Ian? Because you're a motoring YouTuber, so you must be aware of the figures. This is Highways England. Across Europe, it says only Sweden, Norway and Switzerland have lower road fatality rates than the UK. Our motorways are the safest type of road in the country. And they compare the numbers of deaths on motorways to those on the smart motorways and point out that 431 road deaths were on motorways and 24 were on smart motorways. So sort of making the point that actually there are fewer deaths on smart motorways than motorways. But I wonder whether if you compared deaths per mile of motorways and smart motorways, those figures would stack up. Because, of course, there are far fewer miles of smart motorways, aren't there, than there are of other motorways.
But a worrying statistic is when they first came out, I think the deaths were something like 1 for every 43 miles on smart motorways. That has dropped to 1 in 17, I believe, which shows that things are getting worse.
Right.
And I think one of the reasons is they changed the requirement for the refuges. They used to be every half a mile. They've moved that to every 2.5 kilometres. And that just isn't enough. If your car develops a problem, it's going to stop. You can't coast 2.5 kilometres.
Of course you can't.
Not gonna happen.
And I have to say, I'm beginning to wonder, actually, if on a legal level, these so-called smart motorways are illegal because they're discriminatory. Because people who are disabled can't get over the barrier. People who are people who are disabled can't get over the barrier onto the safe side. People who are in or with mechanised wheelchairs, they're way too heavy to lift over the barrier, so they are stuck. They are stuck in the live lane, and that's discriminatory.
Having children, having small animals, you're having to spend time to get a child out of a seat while you're standing in a live traffic lane.
And a viewer yesterday got in touch to talk about a horse box. You know,
and the horses were killed.
And the horses.
They got out of their trailer. They left the horses. They couldn't get the horses out. They couldn't get the horses over the barrier. They stepped over the barrier. A few seconds later, a lorry went into the back of the horse box and killed the horses. You know. Listen, we are not on Good Morning Britain, and I'm a fairly new arrival here, as you know. But I guarantee you this: we are not going to let this story go.
No.
We're going to get our teeth deeply into it, and we are going to come back to this probably big time in the new year, because up with this we must not put. Simple as that.
Yeah. OK. Ian, thanks very much indeed. Sally, thank you so much for sharing the story of Derek. He sounds like an incredibly special person.
But I'd just say something
yes, of course.
On a lot of the smart motorways, there is a sheer drop over the other side of the barrier. Have you ever seen that?
Yes, we've had a lot of messages about that. We've had a lot of callers saying exactly that not just in theory, but they broke down, they looked over the barrier, and there was a 50-foot drop, so they couldn't climb over it. You're absolutely... It's a very good point.
Thank you for keeping this going. My sincere thanks.
No, our thanks to you, Sally, actually, and, you know, because you're part of this campaign. And it's tragic that you are. That's the fact of the matter, isn't it? Should not have happened to Derek.
No, he'd be alive today if the smart motorway had been in place.
Yeah, if the hard shoulder had been there, he would have been
with us.
With us, exactly right. Thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.
It's 8:30. Lorraine is here at 9. Morning.
Good morning to you. What an amazing woman. How brave to talk like that, and so important. I mean, it's a no-brainer, isn't it?
You
Absolutely.
think, wouldn't you? I mean, honestly, they don't seem to be working. Too many people have been killed or are at risk. And frankly, I don't know about you, Lorraine, but when I'm on one, I don't feel safe.
No, I don't.
Well, it's like asking you to jump out of a plane without a parachute. Well, we've got cameras, you know, we'll keep an eye on it.
So
it's just
I know.
so counterintuitive.
No, it's great you're doing it, so... Hopefully those in power will actually listen and do the sensible thing, for goodness sake. Right, let me tell you what's on the show